In 2023 and 2024, the term parental rights dominated headlines, and we're going to be hearing it for the foreseeable, with controversial policies in New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and Alberta redefining the political climate in real time.
The governing United Conservative Party introduced 3 pieces of legislation Thursday afternoon, all pertaining to gender identity.
The amendments we're proposing would bring more transparency, clarity, and consistency to Alberta's classrooms, while also respecting parents' indisputable role as caregivers.
The battle for parental rights keeps having generational moments in education, in healthcare, in family law.
Parents have some rights, but they don't have rights in the way that you think.
The mainstream term parental rights has become a cultural flashpoint with loaded connotations that tends to frame the rights of children versus those of adults.
It's become a very politicized term that's grounded in moral panic and not actually in the same way that we talk about other rights, to life, liberty, happiness. Those are like actual defined rights that are very different than the term that we talk about currently in the media cycle as parental rights.
Too much reliance on the so-called experts when the real experts on any individual kid are the parents of that kid.
And though kids are a key focus of populist talk points, they're almost always decentered in decision-making.
It's not fair to kids to expect parental permission just to use the correct pronouns for them.
When it comes to a child's gender identity and expression, who gets to decide?
Kids understand what's going on, and it is depressing them. It's harming them.
What's been happening in the name of parental rights? Who gets to claim them? Let's unravel the movement and its impact on Canada right now. The Canadian movement shares a lot in common with its American counterpart. And while they both sprang from their own social, political, and legal contexts, parental rights advocates seek influence over school curricula and policies on both sides of the border.
I'm here to protect my grandchildren from any sexual orientation in schools. It's wrong.
To understand the movement's goals here, it's helpful to consider some key moments in the US. Let's go back to early pandemic years, 2021. You might remember an uproar around, quote, critical race theory.
Critical race theory is racist.
This led to parent groups attempting to censor books in schools that discuss systemic racism and colonial history, among other things.
Schools are trying to poison our children's minds, teaching them about things that they have no right to be taught in school.
Parents got vocal and mobilized. Some popular claims sounded like this one.
I do not agree with teaching children how to feel about things. That is called indoctrination.
In the US in particular, it's very led by a certain corner of the Christian right that is pushing these kind of quote-unquote traditional family values.
Part and parcel to this war on God-given gender is the role of parents, and whether they or we have the right to speak into and redirect our children from harm.
And positioning people who are in opposition to traditional family values as a threat.
So friend, as the pagan nation and its sex cult continues its path toward the abyss, have no qualms of conscience for living for what is true and for fighting for your family.
Like these same emotional tugs are used for these different issues.
We can keep tracing the ideology of parental rights way back to the 1990s, when parents made concerted efforts to restrict sex ed in classrooms.
I think this whole issue of safe sex is indeed a myth.
Back further to the 1970s.
The whole concept of even entertaining such an ordinance is immoral.
With campaigns like Save Our Children, which claim that governmental support for LGBTQ rights infringed on parental rights to raise their kids according to their own values.
Commercials, the Save Our Children group is appealing to parental anxieties, saying gays will flaunt their homosexuality before impressionable children.
Now, fast forward to present day, and the buzzwords may have changed, but the tensions remain the same.
They can mutilate our children without your permission. Parental rights. I said the other day, I will bring back parental rights into our school system, right? Parents, you have rights.
And it's not just rhetoric, it's also law.
More than 500 bills restricting the rights of LGBTQ+ people have been introduced across the country this year. 77 of those bills have been passed, impacting education and healthcare.
Canada hasn't seen quite the surge in pieces of legislation, but the move to entrench parental rights in law is happening for the first time.
I felt it was important that parents have a voice, and just to be motivated and encouraged to say, you can stand up, you can speak out. This is another example of government overreach where ideologies are politically driven and they're being shoved down kids' throats and parents.
The support for these policies has brought together really disparate groups, all in the name of protecting children and reclaiming parents' autonomy, which they claim to have lost.
Nowadays, if parents try to ask for any sort of exemption from their kids, they're being trampled over by the schools saying, no, your kid has to learn this. I believe that parents will always be the first and last government for their household. It is absurd to think that children can change their pronouns at young ages and not inform their parents.
I think one of the greatest ironies of the so-called parental rights movement is proponents will tell you, okay, we're here to protect children. What we're seeing is a large harm to children.
When I first came out, I came out to a teacher because I felt that safety with them. I made them promise not to tell my parents because I was afraid I would get kicked out.
It is important for children to have the power to choose how they want to identify themselves and to choose who they share that with. Even in families where parents are supportive, they may still feel fearful, anxious, worried about it, and the kids may want to protect the parents from having those feelings. What we want is for youth to find their most authentic self. They have the right to choose what that looks like and what kind of environment gives them the most space to do that.
Let's take a look at how the political environment is changing across Canada and go back to a New Brunswick of 2020, when Policy 713, the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Policy, was first enacted.
You know, when I first read Policy 713, I thought, how well this has been put together.
The original aim of 713 was to improve the lives of gender and sexually diverse youth and to keep them safe. It required teachers and school personnel to respect a student's right to self-identify.
Clearly, you can see years of effort went into drafting that policy to get it right.
And then 2023.
That policy got rolled back.
If a transgender or non-binary student under the age of 16 wishes to change their preferred pronoun or name, parental consent will be required.
The changes drew immediate criticism from New Brunswick's child and youth advocate and youth themselves.
The parent has a right to teach their values to the child. The parent does not have the right to a state apparatus to force their child to live by those values.
Policy 713 is the bare minimum to make sure that there's safe spaces for everyone.
So without this, so many students could just be in danger.
Now that has kind of set an example for other Conservative premiers across Canada that these kinds of policies can exist, can happen, and that there is I wouldn't say a widespread popular appeal for them so much as an appeal with a very specific segment of kind of a further right, socially conservative base.
All this set the stage for Saskatchewan's Parents' Bill of Rights, Bill 137, which passed in an emergency parliamentary session in the fall of 2023, the first bill of its kind in Canada that mentions parents' rights in the actual legislation.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe went ahead and introduced a new policy. There wasn't a policy to roll back in Saskatchewan, but wanted to introduce a new policy that has these sorts of restrictions on students, changing their pronouns at school without their parents knowing.
In addition to approving students' pronoun changes, parents now have to sign off on course selection and be informed of any sex ed programs.
What it does is it protects us in the event that something is happening with my child and I have the right to know about it.
Having that authority over my family is of incredible importance. To have it be controlled by somebody else or by the education system just does not seem right in any way to me.
My child has the right to be an individual. I'm here to support their growth, not to dictate who they become.
So do parents have rights?
They have a right to support their child.
Along with Bill 137, the government also introduced a policy to ban outside groups from leading these classes.
Assault centers in Saskatchewan have been caught in this policy, which means we are not currently providing life-saving child sexual abuse education to students.
Organizations like the Saskatoon Sexual Assault and Information Center had partnered with school boards for decades and focused on themes like consent and preventing sexual violence, in a province with one of the highest sexual assault rates in the country.
The governing Saskatchewan Party invoked the Charter's notwithstanding clause to guard the bill from any court challenges. They'll have to re-evaluate the clause's use in 5 years.
The parental rights policy was so controversial that it immediately faced court challenges. This is the first piece of provincial law that removes autonomy from children in the realm of gender identity and gives that control explicitly to their parents.
Premier Danielle Smith first signaled the legislation was coming earlier this year, and it has garnered lots of headlines ever since.
Then enter Alberta in January 2024, with bigger ambition than New Brunswick and Saskatchewan.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith came forward and said, okay, pronoun policies, Sure. Sex ed policies? Sure. Let's start restricting gender-affirming care for young people. Let's start restricting trans women's ability to play sports.
And then in December, the Alberta government made amendments to legislation covering all of this.
Parents need to know what's going on with their kids.
Politicians are now indicating that they are going to be banning the use of medical interventions such as hormones and puberty blockers for youth under a certain age.
And that's regardless of a youth's wishes or their parents.
I'm wondering why for this specifically you want to remove that parental right to make that decision with the doctor and the parent and the child.
We just do not believe that this is something that's appropriate, and we have to be able to protect the right of kids to be able to make those choices when they're adults.
We know this will kill trans kids. We have tried to tell her this. She has locked us out of meetings. She has only listened to people who agree with her policies, and she is not listening to doctors, lawyers, parents, and most importantly, she's not listening to trans people.
We've seen study after study that has shown that when kids have access to gender-affirming care, they have better mental health outcomes. I think this is certainly a concerning moment to be in. When we're looking at Alberta especially, there's no reason why a government wouldn't turn around and say we're going to limit other things related to bodily autonomy. As Canadians, we don't have a constitutional right to healthcare, but we, according to the Health Act, should be provided accessible healthcare throughout our entire lives. And when you're looking at these policies and the way that they're targeting youth, you're taking away that access to that healthcare. So the role of the state should be to create an environment and a system or a series of systems in which people do have access to healthcare from the time that they are born to the time that they die.
Let's play back that part about constitutional rights.
As Canadians, we don't have a constitutional right to healthcare.
A constitutional right is granted to an individual through the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They include things like freedom of thought, equality rights, and legal rights.
Like those are like actual defined rights that are very different than the term that we talk about currently in the media cycle as parental rights.
And in fact, if you look up the term parental rights or even parent, these don't explicitly appear in the Charter either. But it doesn't mean these rights don't exist.
I think one of the mistakes that we sometimes make is to think about rights as being slices of a pie that are finite. What we want to think about in terms of parents is that parents have responsibilities to their children. Children are not property of anybody, not of their parents, not of the school, not of the state. They're people.
But children used to be considered property, chattel, owned by their fathers, who could legally make any and all decisions for them. Anything from being forced into servitude or whether they could go to school.
Children are an equity-seeking group, just like other groups of people who have been marginalized in historical contexts. When we treat them with dignity and respect for their personhood, it doesn't take away from parents or guardians or caregivers.
Court rulings have given parents the authority to make some decisions for their kids, like where they live and whether or not they're vaccinated, if and how much religion is a part of their lives, so long as these decisions are in the best interest of the child. So how is that established?
Best interests have evolved over the last 100 to 150 years. We have an international treaty that Canada has signed on to called the UN Convention on Rights of the Child.
The convention was the result of decades of advocacy by people who understood that children are uniquely vulnerable in society and in need of specific human rights protections.
How does it govern the law in Canada? It is reflected in all of our legislation about children. It's our obligation to put those interests above the interests of parents, above the interests of anyone else in the picture, in the litigation. So that convention is referred to by many judges in their decisions.
The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is the most ratified human rights treaty in the world. It helps us to articulate what we mean when we say that children have a right to participate in decisions that affect them, that they have a right to be free from violence, that they have a right to have their identity and their needs protected. In the context of school and education, there are articles of the UNCRC specifically directed at education and a child's right to maximum fulfillment of their own potential. Each of those things is part of a best interest notion. I think when you have a complete understanding of that, it's impossible to see gender identity or gender expression as being anything but in the best interests of a child.
The year-long battle between the New Brunswick government and child and LGBTQ advocates may soon be over.
Saskatchewan's Court of Appeal is hearing arguments today about the provincial government's controversial youth pronoun law.
Legal challenges to gender-affirming policies across the country are playing out right now, but we've been seeing the impact of exclusionary messaging and actions across communities for years.
You're turning on the news and you're seeing these ideas about who you are in your friends and your community. It's not great for mental health. If you know you want to live in a certain way and the ability to do that is taken away, and not just taken away, but actively villainized and actively made a political talking point, it's really hard as a young person. It makes you feel like even more of an outsider than the rest of society is constantly making you feel.
I was once a trans youth in Alberta. For a lot of trans youth right now, they're not so lucky due to the current policies that are about to be enacted.
I had the opportunity this year to talk to trans kids across Canada about how they're faring with some of these policies. And one thing that basically every single person said was they are experiencing an uptick in bullying. They are noticing at their schools that kids feel more emboldened to say homophobic or transphobic things, that they are cast out more readily. Kids are feeling targeted by their peers, they're feeling targeted by adults they've never met, they're feeling targeted by their government. And that is a tremendous amount of pressure to put on a young person. And we all know that being a teenager is hard enough as it is.
Policy developments continue to unfold across provinces, and Unraveled is following them closely. If you are a parent or caregiver of a child who is exploring their gender identity, watch our video with Karen Kugelmass.
The first thing that I do is let them know that I'm on the same team as them. What I want for their child is for them to be able to feel good, to live a life worth living, and for gender to not get in the way of that.